It's my honor and pleasure to introduce to you Professor Danny Pilario, officially Daniel Franklin Pilario. Danny Pilario is a former student of our faculty. Indeed, he obtained his doctoral degree in 2002 with Professor De Schrijver as promoter. His dissertation was entitled Back to the Rough Grounds of Praxis, Exploring Theological Method with Pierre Bourdieu, Beyond Liberation Theology and Radical Orthodoxy. This dissertation received an important prize of the Research Council of this university and was published in the prestigious series of the BETL under the title Back to the Rough Grounds of Praxis, Exploring Theological Method with Pierre Bourdieu, published in 2005. Indeed, the guest speaker of today is a great theologian, and as far as I can see, up to the current day, the only Filipino who published an integral book in the BETL. This is an invitation to the other Filipinos present in the room to do the same. Danny Pilario is much more than the author of the above-mentioned dissertation and book. Danny Pilario is a man with a mission. He teaches at the St. Vincent School of Theology in the Philippines and is currently Dean of Studies in the school. But he also serves on Sundays in a poor parish, literally built on a dump. Pilario is a theologian who takes seriously the context within which theology should be done. Concrete situations, dealing with concrete human beings, taking care for them, and longing together with them for a better world. Danny is a well-respected theologian, often invited to share his ideas with people abroad. Since he left Leuven, he continued to publish in good journals and books, thus becoming an ambassador of his and our faculty. Recently, he was one of the editors of books such as Philippine Local Churches After the Spanish Regime, or also the Second Plenary Council of the Philippines, Quo Vadis. He is a man who is really concerned about and worries about the current situation in his country, and he will certainly speak about it in this lecture entitled Theology and Reflexivity. Dear Professor Pilario, dear Danny, many thanks for the fact that you accepted our invitation. Welcome back in Leuven. The floor is yours.
Professor Mathijs Lamberigts, the present Dean, and who was also our Dean when I studied here almost 20 years ago. It was he who, in my first month battling with homesickness, he came out with puffing his cigar in the hallway and told me it would be okay. My dear professors, some of them were my previous professors when I studied here, and some of them were my classmates. Dear students, guests, and friends, good morning. It was with deep humility that I accepted this invitation to speak in front of you in this annual lecture on the Feast of St. Thomas. I feel so unworthy, and at the same time, greatly honored to follow the lead of esteemed theologians in the previous years. What I would like to do today is to narrate how doing theology, which I learned from this vibrant academic community, has led me to directions and options I have never imagined but which have given meaning to my life. One of my main concerns is the relationship between our theological discourses and the needs of people on the ground. We find different models of this, names like applied theology, practical theology, theological education, and the like. This is not what interests me. Rather, my question is on the level of theological method. How do we do theology in such a manner that seriously takes into account what is important to the people, and in my context, to the suffering people? How do the people on the ground validate our theological constructs so that these reflections serve their well-being and liberation? How does the location of the theologian, us, hinder or foster such a position? For those who like outlines, this slide is for you. For those who are allergic to it, don't worry, delete it. That is just for me so that I would know where to stop. For you to understand this deep concern, let me mention my location. For most part of the week, like you, I teach students of theology, priests and sisters, seminarians and lay people. I check papers, do research, write articles, meet with staff, and do administrative job. Sometimes drive for the professors who have no cars and close the gates. But on weekends, I help my Vincentian converts in our parish in Payatas, the biggest garbage dump in Manila. I have been assisting there for around 15 years now, since the time I went back from Leuven. In the beginning, I was invited there to help in pastoral care, celebrate masses, bless the dead, baptize children, give seminars and organize meetings, etc. Later, I began to realize that it is not mainly I who was helping them. It was in fact they who were helping me. But that is getting ahead of the story. No actual census has been done in Payatas, but estimate give you around 120,000 people living around 22-hectare garbage dump site facility. Among those who attend the Sunday Mass, one cannot tell if one is a waste picker, what we call scavengers, or not. But it is said that around 10,000 people work in shifts or take turns in the dump site facility. On an ordinary day, for instance, a scavenger goes home with an equivalent to 5 to 7 euros in his pocket after selling what he has gathered from the trash. If one is lucky to find a gold necklace in the heap, one can get 30 euros for it, but unfortunately, that happens only once in a lifetime. Last month, there was a mother who found a gold ring. He sold it. He got around 40 euros, and he came to the church. During the offertory, he offered to the priest 10 euros. And the priest said, no, that's not for me, that's for you. And the mother said, no, it came from God, I return it to him. The Payatas situation is dramatized by the presence of pagpag. Pagpag is leftover food from restaurants or eateries thrown as refuse, which finds its way to the dump site. Most common would be uneaten portions of fried chicken or unsold burgers from fast food chains. And those who come across it in the dump site bring it home, fry it, and offer it as dinner for one's family. You ask the question, how do some people live on the garbage of others? Is this really happening? Yes, it does. Of course, the garbage pickers do not brag about it. It is not something to be proud of. But if you ask, they will tell you, yes, we eat. One day I asked the mother, are there people here who eat pagpag? And she says, yes, Father, we do. And she told me, and you even ate that yourself. So when I invited you to my birthday, you were singing karaoke and drinking beer, and you didn't know it was pagpag. Well, I'm still alive. Aside from traditional parish work, the Vincentians also administer many social services, child learning centers, savings mobilization, community health services, etc. There was one program I fondly remember. We had a water facility with a very small pool in which children swam. It was next to the garbage heap, so mothers could leave their children while they worked. After some time, the government-run garbage company decided to expand the heap, and the swimming pool was the first to go. 3 years ago, the chapel where we celebrated masses also had to go, as well as hundreds of shanties around it. Families had been forced to give way to garbage. One sociologist, Zygmunt Bauman, calls this the waste of capital. He did not mean the garbage. He means the people. The situation of Payatas may be of interest to many fields: quality pastoral intervention, community organizing, ecological sustainability, urban planning, etc. But for a theologian like me who shuttles between the dump site and the classroom, I am led to ask the question, how do these rough grounds affect the way I do theology? How do the painful lives affect the way I think about God, salvation, Jesus, scriptures, and morality, etc.? Far from being abstract, this question spells life and death for millions of people in the margins. In fact, I am no longer talking only of Payatas. I am talking of 3.8 million people, half of the world's population, who live on $2.5 a day, as the UN latest survey says. Question: if the church still wants to walk the way of Jesus, it needs to listen to them, because their lives alone already pose difficult and painful questions to the kind of salvation that Jesus brings. This is why a favorite quote from Ludwig Wittgenstein comes in handy. We have got onto slippery ice where there is no friction, and so in a certain sense, the conditions are ideal. But also just because of that, we are unable to walk. We want to walk. We need friction. Back to the rough ground. Though Wittgenstein was referring to the crystalline purity of logic that does not work in real life, I am transposing its relevance to theology. The academe, which is the location of many of us, and our theories do not actually display real fiction with actual life and death consequences. We can dissect issues from left to right, from top to bottom and vice versa, and debate without end until kingdom come. Many of these concepts do not work in the rough grounds like Payatas, but we want to walk, so back to the rough ground. Which led me to the relationship between theology and reflexivity. To start with, let me show two pictures. Both real persons in Payatas. The first is Ate Inday. She is a mother of 4, and her husband has tuberculosis. She works as a scavenger during the day in the dump site to send her 4 children to school and take care of the medical needs of her husband. She is also a volunteer, community leader of the basic ecclesial community of the chapel, I have shown you earlier. During a national gathering of bishops and church leaders at which I am invited to speak, I asked her what she wanted to tell the leaders of the church. And she told me two things. He says, Father, please tell them do not be too strict. The church rules and procedures are just too demanding. The ministers too grumpy, and the structures too inflexible. According to her, all this keep people away from the church and from the sacraments. Ate Inday might not have read the concerns of the recent Synod on the Family and the subsequent document Amoris Laetitia, but she already knows from her heart and experience the real issues, not only pastoral but also theological and structural, that beset the church today. Her second concern was about the homilies of priests. You have to imagine I was one of those priests. So she said, some are too long, others lull you to sleep. And she suggested, can you tell them to give it a little bit of rock and roll? She says, everyday life is already difficult and sad. And when you come to Mass, the priest makes it more sad. Some others so morose that they send you to the cemetery. She said this 1 or 2 years before Bergoglio became Pope and before he wrote about the same issues lengthily in Evangelii Gaudium. In an article that I wrote somewhere, I tried to examine the recent pronouncements of the Magisterium on the Eucharist from Pope John Paul II to Benedict XVI. I found some common elements. For instance, the retrieval of the notion of vertical sacrifice, the promotion of Eucharistic amazement, the nitty-gritty rules of alms, chalices, and stoles, the restoration of Gregorian chant, the Latin language, and Tridentine rite. What is sad is that there are bishops and diocesan liturgists who follow these things to the letter, even in the far mountains of Tralala. Ate Inday is right. Maybe there is a need for a little bit of rock and roll in the way we do liturgy. The second picture is a regular mass goer in Payatas. His name is Bogi. To tell you, our Eucharistic celebrations in Payatas are a little bit interactive. I ask them questions and they answer. They ask me questions and then I answer. And one Sunday morning, I was a little bit inspired to say a longer homily, and this lady raised up her hand and said, Father, can you continue next Sunday? It's a little bit too long. Don't worry, we will back again next Sunday. In one of the feasts of the Corpus Christi, I spoke about the meaning of the Eucharist and body and blood of Christ, etc. This man, Bogi, raised his hand and said, you talked about the body and blood of Christ, yet during communion, it is only you who take the blood. That's true, right? This morning, before our Mass, we will still discussing with Jack whether we distribute both the bread and the wine. I was thinking, I hope they would distribute both. We only receive the body, and you receive the wine. And he says, don't you think that's unfair? One does not need to study liturgy to know that he is absolutely right. Those of us who have undergone studies in liturgical history know that this was the standard way of receiving communion in the first 10 or 11 centuries. It was only in the Council of Constance in 1415 that communion was restricted to the form of bread alone, later reinforced in Trent and Counter-Reformation. Communion in both species was restored in Vatican II, but present church practice took a long time to follow. Bogi was right. It is unfair when we deny lay people the right to a theologically sound practice. And here I was, a theologian graduate from the Catholic University of Leuven, who just chose to forget it together with the rest of my church. In that Mass, I realized I was wrong, so I relented. We scampered for additional wine and distributed both species for all. When it was time for communion, Bogie lined up to receive communion host from me. There were other 5 ministers with me, but he intentionally lined up in my queue, and he told me, "Since you were wrong, you should give me 2. This brings me to questions of reflexivity. Reflexivity has long gained currency in scientific discourses of our time. Albert Einstein already acknowledged it long time ago. As far as laws of mathematics refer to reality, they are not certain. And as far as they are certain, they do not refer to reality. In the field of social sciences, at least in the English-speaking world, the notion of reflexivity started with Robert Merton's now famous notion of self-fulfilling prophecy, later theorized as Oedipal effect by Karl Popper or bootstrapped induction by Barry Barnes. Earlier in the century, a certain author, William Thomas, writes, "The situations that men define as true become true for them." Self-fulfilling prophecy. Simply put, because of blindness brought about by one's location, a self-fulfilling prophecy is a false definition of the situation, evoking a new behavior which makes the originally false conception come true. Merton, 1948. As you will know, this is not a new idea. Marx already talked about this in False Consciousness, or Karl Mannheim and the Frankfurt School already spoke about the critique of ideology. Reflexivity features strongly in the now emerging field called Sociology of Scientific Knowledge, or SSK, that examines the social conditions and effects of science, and with the social structures and processes of scientific activity. Maybe you are familiar with the famous debate between the weak program and the strong program. Names like Thomas Kuhn, Paul Feyerabend, Imre Lakatos versus David Bloor, Barry Barnes, and Bruno Latour. I do not want to further burden you with names and jargon in a field different from our own. I just want to get some salient points that these studies in the philosophy of science, so that theology can profit from them. This brings me to familiar grounds. Pierre Bourdieu, a French sociologist, thinks that our scientific knowledge process is fraught with illusion, emerging from 3 sources. Number 1, personal locations. Number 2, our belonging to a specific field of specialization, and in our case, theology, and being part of the scholastic or academic field itself. First, our belonging to certain class brings with it perspectives only common to those in our class. We are thus blind to the worldview of other classes. It is the same with gender, race, and religion. To make knowledge production reflexive, it might be good to suggest some structural and political forms to this threefold reflexive program in order to counter our prejudices. If illusion is brought about by one social location, like economic status, gender, race, or religion, an organization and constant meeting of professionals, theologians for example, from different locations, first world and third world, black, white, and yellow races, different faith denominations, and varied gender orientations. These might be helpful to point out biases and prejudices one harbors in one's thinking process. Personal bias and prejudices brought about by social location are most easy to detect because those coming from other social locations, gender, race, and belief, can easily see the loopholes in the other's perspective. But for such encounters to be successful, our conferences need to be places of critical interaction, not a meeting of like-minded people citing each other's works, scratching each other's back in the process of scouting for connections for future research projects. But how will this mutual critiquing happen when most of our symposia and conferences, at least the ones I attended, become routinary and hurried reading of long texts after the other? While sitting on those conference seats, I am frustrated that there was no debate that was going on because time is up. I often wonder, why not just send us the texts so that we can read them at our convenience? We could have saved on time, money, transportation, and energy. One venue for this exchange of ideas from different social locations are the refereed journals. But access to these journals are so expensive that it's only the rich universities which can afford their subscriptions. In a two-thirds world context, how can I justify subscribing to one journal for 1,000 euros a year when we could not even afford to pay our professors a meager honorarium? I'm not even talking about access to being published in these journals. The rest of the world's professionals are scrambling to make it to Elsevier, Wiley, Thomson Reuters, ISI, which also rank first in the criteria of faculty classification and promotion. In our world, where internet connection is at a snail's pace, no one even hears about academic ranking of journals. Second, a deeper bias in scientific knowledge comes from our membership in the theological field itself. We share jargons, taken for granted assumptions, ways of argumentations that professionals from other disciplines, no matter how erudite, will never understand, much more Atiinday and Bogi. Not that these are bad, they are necessary to elaborate our disciplinary discourse, but it also engenders prejudices that need to be critiqued by other disciplines. In this level, interdisciplinary exchanges encourage the surfacing of these prejudices, thus leading to more inclusive knowledge process. Multidisciplinary cooperation in research and theory formation with disciplines other than theology will help theology itself. Theology can employ its professional resources to critique the workings of politics, or economics can labor the illusions of the aesthetic field. Just as it does this to others, theology should also welcome criticism from other disciplines. Theology will never be self-sufficient to understand reality, as John Milbank would like us to believe. Herbert Simon, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, writes, he says, disciplines like nations are a necessary evil that enables human beings of bounded rationality to simplify the structure of their goals. But parochialism is everywhere, and the world surely needs international and interdisciplinary travelers who will carry new knowledge from one cave to another. That is an interesting quote. It tells us that we are cavemen and women, after all. We never thought we were. What does this mean for theology? First, this means that theology needs to relinquish her own crown of being able to say the last word vis-a-vis interdisciplinary specializations. Even as it has its role to critique other fields and assumptions, it also needs to learn that it is just one voice among the many other voices in the whole field. Since my first year here, I was always amazed to see my theology professors marching ahead of the rest of the disciplines during the Mass of the Holy Spirit. I don't know if we have to rethink maybe we can also march last or in the middle from time to time. Second, the sub-disciplines in theological field need to be more intradisciplinary, even within theology itself. We have become so specialized that we do not converse on researches with other departments, or we refuse to comment on them. I heard one professor, not here, but in another university, who says, a student came and said, Professor, I would like your comment on this work of mine. I would like to specialize in the Old Testament. And this professor says, can you look for another professor? I'm only specialized in the New Testament. And the student says, is that not one Bible, Professor? We train specialists here, and maybe we are right. But when we reach our schools in the third world where we do not have the luxury of having available specializations, we are at a loss. Even as we acknowledge the importance of specialization, it might help us to listen one novelist, Tom Robbins, who said, to specialize is to brush one tooth. When a person specializes, he channels all his energies through one narrow conduit. He knows one thing extremely well and is ignorant of almost everything else. The third kind of illusion is our belonging to the scientific field itself. People in this field do precious and necessary jobs. They think of formulas or constructs, theories, but within the field of scholarship. In this situation of leisure, people can discuss and debate about anything in the world without end. And these games are without direct life and death consequences. This intellectualist bias is most difficult to detect when professionals are always looked up to as providing solutions to the problems confronting the world. I just noticed that when a professor is interviewed on TV, most often there are shelves of books behind him to give authority to his ideas, even if these are the same ideas that a taxi driver can tell you when you talk to him in the taxi. What he says, the professor, is well-researched and scientific. But in the world, but the world of science has is different from the world of practice, Bourdieu says. In other words, if we want an honest knowledge production process, the world of practice, the rough grounds, should be able to critique our world of scientific production. Or following another thinker, Gaston Bachelard, who says, if the world in which one thinks is not the world in which one lives, our way of living should have a say in our way of thinking. Applying this to theology, reflexivity refers to the position of the theologian in the whole academic production. In order to avoid the illusion of omnipotence or omniscience, where the theologian thinks that the revolution in the order of words is celebrated as the revolution in the order of things, the theologian needs to be confronted by actual situations of peoples on the ground under suffering. No matter how much a theologian, a pastor, a community organizer tries to empathize with the concerns of the farmer, the laborer, and the fisher folk, she or he can never approximate their experience. We have Vincentian converts who live with the people in Payatas 24/7. But their lives are never the same as those dump site scavengers and their struggles to get food the next day. I was confronted by this when I just finished my dissertation. I went home, I presented it to my mother, and in a month after, she was suffering from cancer and she was about to die. She was holding my dissertation and she told me, "You have a doctorate, right?" And I told her yes. And she told me, "What does this book do to give food to our hungry neighbor?" That was the most difficult comment I got outside of my readers beyond the defense. Because until now, that haunts me. What does this specialization do to help alleviate hunger? To be personally reflexive about it, at the end of the day, I go home to a safe place, write about my experience, teach theology, and never worry about my food. The world of science is not the same as the world of praxis. A reflexive theologian thus refuses to say the last word, that privilege is to be given to the people on the grounds whose voices the theologian cannot fully approximate. Or better still, this last word should be given to the totally other, the wisdom, the word of the Spirit. The theological stance is always to listen, to check if one's voice is faithful to theirs and to God, and be silent in front of such a great mystery. In short, reflexivity. I remember here St. Thomas Aquinas, who on the 6th of December, 1273, hung up his instruments of writing in the third part of the Summa. After producing volumes, which no one of us can ever do, he told his secretary, Reginald, I cannot continue because all that I have written seems like straw to me. Let me go back to where I started, the rough grounds in the Philippines today. You must have heard about the Philippine-style war on drugs. Within 8 months in office of this administration, more than 70,000 men, some of them women and even children caught in the crossfire have died in this war. Each day, for the past few months, we have woken up to news of 10 to 15 people who died the night before. The man behind this bloody campaign against population is the very popular President Rodrigo Duterte. Despite protests and criticism from international community, he still enjoys, at the moment, 83% approval rating, and as the latest survey says. The whole political machinery is under his control. His party has majority seats in both Congress and Senate, and seemingly he has the judiciary under his thumb. The hegemonic political field in the Philippines today prevails over the whole political discourse. At this very moment, while I speak, the Congress is voting on its third reading, which turns it into law, if it passes today, the return of the death penalty. Under this law, crimes related to drug use and drug trade, which is the main obsession and fixation of the Duterte administration, are punishable by death, and only that. With Duterte's control of Congress, this might easily pass. We would know at the end of the day. This is most ironic because the Philippines is signatory to the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, which prohibits death penalty. And yet in the country today, the whole political apparatus conspires to kill all those committed and committing drug-related crimes. In reality, however, only the poor are killed. The real drug lords are exonerated of their crimes when they turn into state witness against the critics of this administration. Now, question, where is the church in all this? For a long time, the hierarchy had been divided on what to do with Duterte. Many bishops are pro-Duterte until today, though there are almost also others who have been vocal against him. Many Catholics also agree with Duterte. Many priests and nuns cheer for him. Many of them I personally know. It is so common to hear well-meaning Christians, clergy, religious laity alike. In my Facebook network, they tell me, and I quote, "We need to weed out these pests, even if we want to bring change to this country. They are not human." In this argument, people are turned into pests and are considered inhuman so that it is easier for consciences to accept their deaths. Forget about Kant's categorical imperatives and the ontological ethics. forget about sanctity of human life and inalienable human dignity. What works in the dominant political framework is a pure and crude utilitarianism which accepts that the end actually justifies the means. In the end, the dominant political and ecclesiastical systems collude to drown real voices of victims who cry for help. In the small parish of Payatas where I work, there are already more than 20 victims of extrajudicial killings at the moment, and the number continues to rise. Duterte was sworn into office in June after 1 week Payatas had its first victim. Our latest victim was killed just last week before I left for Belgium. In the name of reflexivity, it might be good to hear their voices. Let me just tell one story. The story of Remy and her son. I will have an opportunity to share more stories and the resistance on the ground in my talk tomorrow evening. Remy is more than 70 years old. Juan, her married son with 6 children, was on the drug watch list. He was a police target. When a group of policemen barged into his house one night, he was not there because he was working in another place outside Payatas. Instead, they captured his pregnant wife, and she later delivered her baby in prison. That is the child held by her grandmother in the picture. When Juan heard about this, he was warned, but he could not bear it, that no one was there for the children except his 70-year-old mother. With utmost caution, he made it home on the birthday of one of his daughters. He cooked spaghetti for them at breakfast, a real treat for the poor family in Payatas. When they had finished eating, a group of 7 policemen suddenly charged into the shanty, forced the children out, and then shot at Juan. Wounded but alive, Juan knelt in front of the police, saying, "Please don't kill me. If I did something wrong, you can imprison me the whole of my life together with my wife. But please don't kill me. I have 7 children and no one is going to stand up for them." The policemen did not listen. They pumped 2 or 3 more bullets into him in front of his daughter. Juan's young daughter saw it all that happened. The police placed a gun in his hand after having been dead and a packet of illegal drugs and took a photo of the crime scene. Remy, his mother, who was out of the house at that time, came running from the neighborhood and screamed, "You do not get only money for killing my son, you are promoted in your ranks as well." Remy, not connected with government at all, knew that the police get incentives for the killings they do. As if his death was not painful enough, Juan's funeral service costs reasonably high. It turns out that the funeral home was also owned by another policeman. No one came to his wake. Even the old mothers who were prayer leaders of this community were afraid to come and pray. The whole neighborhood was quiet about it. No one asked and inquired. No one raised a voice. Everyone shuddered in fear. That makes grieving so painful when the family can only suffer in silence. These violent acts of intimidation make the real voices on the ground fall on deaf ears. Duterte and his political machine will never listen to or heed them. When the evidence against the police became so glaring, the operation to kill suspected drug offenders was supposedly frozen for a few weeks. It turned out to be temporary, and the second phase has just begun, even as I speak. The church and the ecclesiastical system waited for 7 long months. The bishops remained divided until the deaths numbered 7,000. And we are happy that they finally issued a statement condemning the killings 1 month ago. But as mentioned earlier, many Catholics, and some of them in the church serving, are still Duterte fanatics until today. My point is simple. When the dominant powers refuse to listen to the voices of the victims from the ground, when the ruling systems, political, economic, ecclesiastical, are not reflexive, one only gets a government that kills, an economy that kills, a theology that kills. But no one can ever banish and annihilate the innocent look of Juan's daughter as he stares you in the face and begs, "Please do not kill me." This vulnerable being is just there, putting our self-assured theories and theologies into question. In her silence, she asks, begs us, compels us to act in respect and compassion so that she may live. It was only then that I began to understand what Professor Borgrave went on and on and on in almost every class in cold winter mornings in our Leuven classrooms. He kept repeating Levinas in almost every class. He says, "The face in its nudity and defenselessness signifies, do not kill me." In the end, I stand in front of you today because I have learned theological reflexivity from a person very dear and well cherished to this faculty, Professor George Discraver. When he knew I was invited to this event, he made sure that I could come despite my hesitation and despite immigration issues. He even helped me brainstorm on possible topics. At one point, I got so nervous because he planned when he should have come home to suggest to the dean that there should be an open forum after this lecture. Talk about applying reflexivity. I'm showing this photo, which I took using his old camera at one of the dinners he prepared for us in his apartment. He had it printed, mounted on his wall, and would show it to his guests with joy. The guy with him was my classmate, June Bombongan. It looks like June, his student, is lecturing the professor on something I do not know anymore about. Through one simple photo, I come to understand what reflexivity is all about. Up to his passing away in the Philippines, Father George continued to learn from others, from his new young students, even younger than us. He came with me to Payatas and listened to people several times. When he heard about these deaths this year, he said something must be wrong. Even if at that same time, his Filipino Jesuit converts were telling him that Duterte is the Philippines' best option. Father Discraver's stance of listening and discernment, of openness and critical spirit, of compassion and concern for the victim was present until the very end. And when his own end has come, he decided to be buried in the land where most of the victims were. Today, I would like to thank the faculty for sharing this reflexive soul with us. Until the end, he was teaching us what and how it is to do theology. Thank you very much.